All right, it's the top of the hour, so I'm going to get started. Hello and welcome to Consumer Perceptions and Willingness to Pay for Sustainable Environmental Practices in the Floral Industry, hosted by the Floral Marketing Fund. Before we get started, I'd like to share some background on the fund. The Floral Marketing Fund's mission is to develop, support, and promote collaborative fundraising, research, and marketing efforts to increase flower sales. You can learn more and get involved in future efforts by visiting floralmarketingfund.org. While there, you can visit our 16 available research reports and marketing resources. Today, we'd like to thank the co-sponsors, BloomNet and Syndicate Sales, who made this study possible in coordination with the American Floral Endowment. BloomNet is a leading floral services company serving more than 5,000 local florists across the country. Syndicate Sales is a leading manufacturer and supplier of floral hard goods for retail florists. And we'd like to extend another thank you to the researchers at Mississippi State University and Texas State University who led the study. Our presenter today is researcher Dr. Coleman Etheredge. Cole has been involved in floral design since his time at Texas State University. He completed his doctoral degree in horticulture at Texas A&M. Currently, Cole is an assistant professor of floral management at MSU. In recent years, Cole's research has focused primarily on methods for composting retail floral waste and consumers' perceptions of environmental attributes utilized at retail floral shops. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the session over to Cole to present the key findings from this brand new report, which will be linked in the chat, and answer your questions. The presentation is pre-recorded, but Cole is here live for Q&A. Any questions that we do not get to during the hour can be submitted to info@floralmarketingfund.org for an email response. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So I would like to start by thanking the sponsors and co-sponsors without whose support this research wouldn't have been possible. The Floral Management Fund, American Floral Endowment, BloomNet, and Syndicate Sales, they all contributed to helping sponsor and fund this project. I would also like to thank my research associates who helped on the project as well, Dr. Jimdell Prince and Dr. Tina Wallachek from Texas State University, without whose help I wouldn't have been able to get through the project. So before I jump into the project and the results and everything, I would like to talk a little bit about the background and how the study came to be. So in the past 10 years or so, we've really begun to see that business models have begun to change to become more environmentally sustainable, more environmentally friendly. And that's really been driven by the consumer. The consumers are starting to put more of their money toward businesses that are more environmentally focused than businesses that are not. The thing is that we haven't really looked deeply into the floral industry. So there's really not been any research looking at what floral providers can do to make their businesses a bit more sustainable in the consumer's eye. So that's really what this study was about. So our main objective of the study was to investigate what consumers perceived as being the most beneficial environmental attributes a floral provider could add to their business model to make consumers more willing to pay a premium for those flowers based on their sustainable attributes. So that's what we investigated. That's what we were looking into. That was the main purpose of this study. Our participation population, we had just over 2,000 people to complete the survey. The survey was distributed in two different manners. It was the same survey regardless of how it got distributed though. So we had our sponsors to send out the survey to some mailing list and post it on social media, and we left it open for 5 weeks for consumers to take the survey that way. And we also contracted Momentive Inc. to post the survey on their platform so that their participants could take the survey as well. And with Momentive Inc., you can be very specific about who you want to take your survey. And so we indicated that the person had to be 18 years or older and they had to live within the United States to take the survey. And so with those two combined, we ended up with just over 2,000 people to take the survey. The survey itself consisted of 31 questions, and the survey was constructed based on past research. We looked at past research on consumers' perceptions on business models in different industries. We put the survey together based on some past surveys and then based on some feedback from the sponsored organizations themselves. So it was very collaborative putting the survey together. The survey itself was broken down into kind of 4 sections on stuff we were kind of collecting and looking at. So one section was attempting to determine what environmental attributes consumers considered to be the most important for floral providers to include in their business model, and then how much more would they be willing to pay for a floral provider that would provide that sustainable attribute in their business model. We also looked at kind of a section that there was a certification that existed for florists to get certified as more eco-friendly florist. What are your perceptions around that? Would you be willing to shop there more or be willing to pay more for that service? We also collected information on their overall shopping habits when it comes to flowers, and we collected the demographic information so we could further investigate it, the sample that way. This slide is just listing some key findings that we found. These are kind of the findings that I'll touch on today in the presentation. This is by no means all the findings that we found during the research. I cannot cover everything that we found in the time that I have allotted today. So if you are interested in seeing more of what we found, then I encourage everybody to go and read the final report. It's all in there. So we'll start by looking at the overall shopping habits of our participant group. We found that our participant population was purchasing flowers most of the time 3 or 4 times a year or more. Most of those purchases were occurring in person, and they were purchasing a majority of their floral products from local florists or from retail stores inside of grocery stores or kind of big box stores. And they were purchasing those flowers a majority of the time as a gift for others. So that kind of shows you who's purchasing those flowers or how often they're purchasing those flowers. We then kind of started with trying to get a general feel of what our participation group felt about environmental attributes inside of a business model. So we initially asked if there is a business out there, a floral provider that is using environmentally sustainable attributes in their business model, would you be, do you feel it's right or more correct to shop there than at a floral provider that doesn't? And a majority of the population indicated that they felt that would be the correct choice. And then we asked them, how willing would you be to shop at a floral provider that has sustainable attributes when compared to a floral provider that doesn't have sustainable attributes? And 61%, just over 61%, indicated that they would be more willing to shop at a floral provider that had some sort of sustainable attributes in their business model than a florist that did not. So right off the bat, it kind of indicates that if you incorporate sustainable attributes into your floral business model, consumers are going to be a bit more encouraged to shop at your location over other businesses. We then tried to break it down even further. We asked them specifically how willing or unwilling they would be to shop at a floral provider based on very specific sustainable attributes they can incorporate into their business model. So we came up with 5 sustainable attributes that we asked them out asked them about specifically in this survey. There, of course, could be other attributes that could be investigated further outside of this study. So what we found was that a majority indicated that with any of the sustainable attributes we asked them about, they indicated that they would be more willing to shop at that floral provider than one that didn't have that sustainable attribute. But not all of the sustainable attributes were equal in the consumer's mind. They perceived some as being better or more worthy of shopping at that location than some of the other sustainable attributes. So I've got them listed here on the left-hand side of this slide in order of how they perceive them as being most beneficial to kind of least beneficial. So 65% of the population indicated that they would be more willing to shop at a floral provider that used locally sourced flowers than those that did not. And within the study, we were specific as to what locally sourced meant. We said that locally sourced meant that the flowers were being sourced within 100 miles of the place in which the flowers were being provided. So within 100 miles of the flower provider's location. So that was the most significant one to consumers. That's the one that they said would be the most beneficial, the one that would get them in the door more than the other ones. They also indicated that florists who recycle their floral waste through composting would also be something that would encourage them to shop at that location more than other locations. And those were really the two big ones that we found, that these two, they were the most interested in, and then some of the other ones they were least interested in, such as the use of organically grown flowers. So they were really interested that the flowers needed to be grown locally, but it didn't matter to them as much if the flowers were grown organically. So they indicated that the use of organically grown flowers was kind of the least important attribute that a floral provider could add to make them willing to shop there over other floral provider locations. We then wanted to see how much more they would be willing to pay for flowers from a floral provider that included these different attributes into their business model. And so we did find that the two that they were willing to pay the most for were the two that they indicated they were the most interested in. So they were willing to pay the most for flowers from a floral provider that used locally grown flowers. And again, that meant flowers grown within 100 miles of the floral provider's business location. And then the second one they were most interested in paying the most for was from a floral provider that would recycle their floral waste through composting activities. And then you can see they become less interested in paying more for some of the other attributes there. So overall, though, a majority, so at least 50% or more of our participant population indicated that they would be willing to pay at least 10% or more for all of these attributes. It's just they were willing to pay more for some of the attributes. They considered some of the attributes to be more worthy of paying more of a premium for. And again, that was the use of locally grown flowers and the fact that the floral waste could be composted instead of entering a landfill situation. So those were the two that they were most interested in paying a premium for. We then kind of broke the question down even further, where we asked them to rank. So if you get one choice, which one would you consider to be the most important and which one would you consider to be the least important of these different attributes? In this question, we also changed the phrasing in the questions a little bit. So the answers that we got here were a little bit different than what we had found on those previous two slides I just spoke about. So up until this point, the consumers had indicated that the use of locally sourced flowers was going to be the most important thing to them, and that's what they indicated they would be willing to pay the most for. However, on this ranking question, they then indicated that the use of more recyclable, upcyclable materials outside of floral products was the most important thing to them. However, in this question, we kind of reworded things a little bit. We didn't use the actual term locally sourced flowers. We just used a more generic term, flowers used in floral design are sustainably grown and sourced. So with that term locally sourced flowers kind of taken out of the pictures, it seemed to kind of change their answers a little bit. So it seems to indicate that the term locally sourced flowers is kind of a trigger word for consumers when it comes to purchasing some of these sustainable products. So the term locally sourced flowers should be incorporated into kind of any advertising if you are using locally sourced flowers, because that seems to kind of trigger them, that get them to kind of come in the door and purchase those flowers. We then kind of moved on and we asked them a hypothetical. So we wanted to know if a certification existed that a floral provider could get that would indicate that they were incorporating sustainable attributes into their business model, would you be more willing to shop at that location because they have that certification? And would you even trust that they're doing what that certification says they're doing? And overall, a majority of our participants indicated that they would be more willing to shop at a floral provider that had some sort of eco-friendly certification behind them, and that they would trust that certification overall. So it came out 55.7 for both of those numbers, indicated that they would be willing to shop at a certified and that they would trust that certification. We then, of course, wanted to know, would you be more willing to pay a premium from a florist that had a eco-friendly certification backed onto their business? And a majority did indicate that they would be willing to pay at least up to 10% of a premium for flowers from sort of an eco-friendly certified florist over a floral provider that that did not have some sort of certification behind their business. So a certification does seem like something that the consumer is interested in and something that the industry might look at creating at some point. We then kind of wanted to know overall, what are your perceptions on the floral industry currently? So how sustainable do you think the floral industry is right now while taking this survey? And we asked that question at the very beginning of the survey. It was the first question we asked, and it was the very last question we asked at the end of the survey. And so overall, through the course of taking the survey, their views on how sustainable the floral industry was did decline a little bit. I'm equating that to them probably thinking a little bit more in depth about sustainability in the floral industry as they moved throughout the survey. They were probably thinking a bit more about what sustainability really meant in the floral industry. So we did see that kind of perception change a little bit, but overall, they thought that, you know, if 10 is the floral industry is completely sustainable and 0 is the floral industry is not sustainable at all, they rated us at about a 5.86, so kind of sustainable. We then kind of broke it down and took a deeper look at what the participants were saying based on the different demographics that we collected from them. So I'll start off with gender here. So overall, we did have a few more females take the survey than we had males, but not too drastic of a difference there. We did find there to be some significant differences in the way that the males answered questions in relation to females. So in some of the questions on how willing would they be to make purchases based on some of the different sustainable attributes that we could include in a floral provider business model, the males indicated a bit more willingness to shop at some of these floral providers based on some of the different attributes. So the one I have listed here, the example is males indicated a bit more willingness to shop at a floral provider that recycled or used upcycled products instead of kind of single-use plastics. However, that did not translate into more willingness to pay. So when we looked at females and males and how willing they were to pay for all the attributes, there was no significant difference in the way the females and the males answered those questions. So overall, the males indicated that they were a bit more willing to shop at these floral providers that had very certain attributes, but they were not willing to pay more for those attributes in relation to the females. And in fact, if you really get down into the numbers and you really start to look at them and do the calculations, you find it's the females who are slightly more willing to pay a premium than it is the males. So the males may indicate that they are more willing to shop at these places based on these attributes, but it's the females in reality who are actually willing to pay a bit more of a premium for these attributes than the males. We then looked at the shopping habits based on gender. So we did find that overall males were making a few more flower purchases within a year than females were. But we did find that when you are purchasing flowers for yourself, females are actually purchasing more flowers for themselves than the males are. We then looked at the answers all based on age as well. What we found was that it was the younger participants, especially those participants 34 years of age and younger, who indicated the most interest in making purchases from floral providers that had sustainable attributes incorporated into their business models. And it was the older participants who seemed the least willing to pay a premium for flowers from a floral provider that had sustainable attributes. And that is supported by research that's looked in the past. It has found that overall, it's the younger population who is typically more interested in those sustainable attributes than it is the older population. Looking at the shopping habits based on age, really, it's the oldest population, those 65 years of age and older, who are actually making the fewest floral purchases. So they indicated being the least interested in making floral purchases from floral providers that had sustainable attributes, but they're also the age population that is making the fewest floral purchases overall. We found that the age population making the most floral purchases are typically those between 45 and 54 years of age. So, around that age is people making the most floral purchases. We then looked at the answers based on education level. Overall, based on education, the results were mostly the same. It was just for this one sustainable attribute I have listed here, the use of fair trade products, did we find that there was a difference on how participants answered based on their education. So we found that those with postgraduate degrees, so those with masters and PhDs and what have you, they were a bit more interested in making purchases from floral providers that sourced fair trade materials than any of the others based on their education level. However, that did not translate into a willingness to pay more for fair trade product when compared to the other education levels. So while postgraduate people indicated that they were more interested in making purchases from a floral provider that sourced fair trade products, they were not willing to pay more of a premium than any of the other educational levels. So they were willing to pay about the 5 to 10% more, just as everybody else was. Looking at the shopping habits, we found that it is the postgraduate education people who are typically making the most floral purchases. So while they are the most interested in this one kind of specific thing and making the most floral purchases, that did not translate into a willingness for them to actually pay more for those fair trade products. We then looked at it based on race. Not too many conclusions could be drawn based on race, and that's just because when you start to look, our population was heavily skewed toward Caucasian individuals. So almost 70%, it was 69.7% of our sample population was Caucasian, and within some of the other racial groups, our overall numbers were rather low. So it made it kind of difficult to make comparisons based on race. What we did find, though, was regardless of race, all racial groups did indicate that they would be willing to pay, that 10% or more for all of the sustainable attributes. So it didn't matter regardless of race. They were still willing to pay about that 10% more for all the sustainable attributes. When looking at shopping habits based on race, we did find that it was Hispanics and the Native Americans and Native Alaskans who did indicate making the most purchases. Again, their sample populations were rather low, so those results could change if we ran the study again and we got higher numbers within all these different racial categories. So that's what we came up with. But again, because those numbers were kind of so low in some of those different racial groups, if we were to rerun the study with higher numbers in those racial groups, we might come up with some different answers for this. Looking at it based on annual household income, we found that participants who made over $200,000 a year annual household income indicated the least willingness to kind of pay for these different sustainable attributes, or not to say the least willingness to pay. They expressed the least agreement or least willingness to shop at one of these floral providers based on these different sustainable attributes. That did not translate into willingness to pay, though. So while people who made over $200,000 kind of indicated that they were the least willing to shop at these floral providers based on sustainable attributes, they were still willing to pay that 5 to 10% more as all other annual household income groups indicated as well. And in fact, if you really start to break into the numbers and really look close, they were willing to pay slightly more for some of the sustainable attributes than some of the other income levels. So people who made the most amount of money indicated the least willingness, but that did not translate into them being least willing to pay for these sustainable attributes. They were still willing to pay the 10% or more. Looking at the shopping habits of those making different annual household incomes, there was kind of a big split on the percentage of people making purchases 3 to 4 times a year based on household income. So those making $75,000 or more were making more purchases in a year than those making less than $75,000 in a year. So if you were making more than $75,000, you on average were making more floral purchases within a year. So that kind of brings us to our overall conclusions. And like I said, this is by no means all the conclusions that we drew. This is just kind of the big ones that we found and that I touched on in the presentation. But the big one was that based on the sustainable attributes that we gave them to look over, they the participants indicated that they would be most willing to shop at a floral provider that used locally sourced flowers. And again, we defined that in our study as being flowers sourced within 100 miles of that floral provider. So that was what consumers indicated being as the sustainable attributes they were most interested in paying a premium for as well. Flower waste that is composted was another big one. So if a floral provider, instead of throwing their flower waste into garbage bags that end up in a landfill, if they would take that flower waste and they would introduce that into some sort of composting system, the consumers indicated that that was something that would get them in the door more. They would be more willing to shop at a floral provider that did that over one that did not. But they also indicated that they would be willing to pay more of a premium for that sustainable attribute than some of the other sustainable attributes that we asked them about. So locally sourced flowers and composting the floral waste were the two big sustainable attributes that that the consumers were most interested in, and these were the two that they were most willing to pay a premium for as well. Overall, though, regardless of the sustainable attribute, all of our participants indicated that they would be willing to pay up to about 10% for any of those sustainable attributes. So even if it's the organic flowers or the fair trade flowers, they indicated that if you were advertising that sort of thing in your floral business, they would be willing to pay up to about 10% of a premium for flowers from any of those floral attributes. It's just locally sourced flowers and composted flowers were the two that they were the most interested in, and the ones they were most willing to pay a premium for. When we look at the demographics, when we kind of take all that demographic information and bring it together, the demographic of the consumer that is most willing to pay a premium for sustainable attributes, that would be a younger person. So somebody 35 years of age or younger is typically going to be more willing to pay a premium for these attributes. Somebody who is college educated, and it specifically seems to look like the more college education you have, the more you might be willing to pay. And annual household income, of course, made a difference. So those who were making more than $75,000 in annual household income were going to be making more flower purchases. And females seem to be the ones who were more interested to pay slightly more for the different environmental attributes, although not enough for it to indicate a significant difference when we're comparing them to the males. The males seem to indicate that they were more willing to shop at a flower shop that had sustainable attributes, but they weren't willing to pay more for those sustainable attributes. In reality, it looked kind of like the females were willing to pay a little bit more for those sustainable attributes when we compare those to the males. So young college educated people who are making over $75,000 in an annual household income who are female are kind of the people who seem to indicate that they are the most interested in shopping at floral providers that have sustainable attributes incorporated into their business model. And they seem to be the people who are willing to kind of pay the most in premiums for shopping at those shops that have those sustainable attributes incorporated into them. As I said, I by no means covered all of our key findings today. There's much more in the report, so I would encourage everybody to log on and read the final report. And to, of course, if you can, I would join the Floral Marketing Fund on their social media page so you can be privy to when all these other reports and stuff kind of go online. So, so I would encourage everybody to log on and read the report, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have right now on what we covered today.
Thank you so much, Cole. We're going to go into questions now. You can submit your questions in the chat or through the Q&A feature. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between both. To get us started, there are two questions on definitions of terms, so I'd like to just get those done right away. One is a repeat of what would be the definition of a locally sourced flower? Is it 10 miles, 100 miles, or 500 miles?
Yeah, sure. So to answer that is there is no true definition that there is no one true definition of what locally sourced means. You ask 100 different people, you're going to get 100 different answers. When you look at it, the federal government has said what locally sourced kind of means to them. If you look at different states, it means different things to different states. If you look at local governments, they've even got their own definitions of what locally sourced means. So what it really comes down to is locally sourced. That definition is defined by the consumer themselves. The consumer has some idea in their head of what locally sourced means to them. We put 100 miles on it just to make it a standard across the board, because if I just had said locally sourced flowers, that would have meant 2,000 different things to 2,000 different people. So locally sourced means what it does to the individual. There are some federal, state, and local definitions based around it. But for example, if you're living in California and you're using California grown flowers, that is more local than what a lot of people are probably doing, which is bringing in and importing flowers from different countries. So that is local in some kind of nature. So if you are doing that, that's something to advertise. If you are using California grown flowers and you live in California, if you're using, if you're up in Washington and using Washington grown flowers and you're in Washington, then I would promote that and announce that to everybody, because then you allow the consumer to decide if that's local enough for them in nature, because some people are going to say local is grown within my city limits, and some people are going to say local is grown within my state. The US government says local is 400 miles of where you're located. So it's going to mean different things to different people. So allow the consumer to decide. But if you are using something more regional, I would announce that to my consumers.
Thank you. The next one on terms is, how is floral defined? Was it cut flowers, potted plants, or both?
How was I'm sorry, what
Floral
was that?
defined in the study.
How was floral defined?
Floral for floral purchases. So they want to know if it was just cut flowers specific, or if it included cut flowers, potted plants, or both.
I believe we said cut flowers and potted plants from a floral provider. I believe so. I would have to pull up the actual survey in front of me, but we did define it, I believe, as cut flowers and potted plants from a floral provider.
The next question is, how can a list of the questions that were asked be obtained?
I have the survey instrument. I'm happy to share the survey instrument with people if they're interested in just seeing what the survey instrument looked like and what questions specifically were asked.
And I believe most are listed throughout the final report as well. So we can go ahead and drop the link for the final report, because you can go through question by question with answers in each one on the final report.
Right. If you pull up the final report, pretty every question we asked is in the final report.
How do you assess the correlation between willingness to pay and actually paying more for sustainable aspects? Concerns around what consumers say they will do versus their actual spending habits.
Right. That is a limitation of this study. We were asking consumers to tell us, their thoughts and what they would be willing to do. If that correlates to action, I can't specifically say. That would have to be another study. We would actually have to get floral providers to make some of these changes and make those announcements, and then we would have to actively go in there and see if there was a change. I mean, that is a study that would potentially be done further down the road, now that we have an idea of what sustainable attributes they like and what they say they're willing to do. We would have to now implement those changes to see if that actually does correlate into their actual actions and what they would do.
All right, we have another question here, and it says, did people perhaps mention a carbon footprint calculation or a life cycle assessment as a sustainable attribute?
No, that wasn't one that we asked about. We didn't specifically ask anything about the carbon footprint of it all. We were kind of covering that a little bit when we asked them about the locally sourced flowers. I didn't leave any room for open-ended questions in any of this, so they couldn't go in there and write any additional attributes. So we did not specifically ask about carbon footprints in this study.
And this study was laying the groundwork for potentially more studies where we could go into expanded space.
Absolutely.
I have another question here, and this one's more on kind of demographics. Do you know if females might purchase more flowers for personal use instead of giving a bouquet or a gift to someone else. So are the females more willing to pay for sustainable attributes, or are purchasers of for floral use of the bouquet more willing to do so? Is there a correlation? So I guess they're asking about if it's connected on if you're buying for self versus buying for others.
Oh, we didn't specifically look at that. I mean, I just noted that the females do tend to make more floral purchases for themselves, but we didn't specifically ask, does it matter why you're buying the flowers? We didn't ask that. We just asked, do these attributes make a difference to you when you go to make your floral purchase? We didn't ask, does it make a difference when you go to make your floral purchase based on why you're making that floral purchase? So we didn't try to correlate or tie any of that all together. In the end, it did look like females were a little bit more willing to pay a little bit more, though not a significant difference. The males kind of said, some of these attributes make us more willing to go to this flower shop and purchase flowers, but that didn't mean that they wanted to pay more for that attribute when compared to females. So the females did seem to be a little bit more environmentally conscious, and past studies have kind of confirmed and backed that up, that when we compare males and females, females are the more environmentally conscious of the two typically.
What is the correlation between education level and disposable income level?
We did not ask anything about disposable income levels. So all we asked about was, what's your annual household income level? Now, that doesn't equate to what's your actual disposable income level. So I can't really answer that question fully because we did not ask anything about disposable income.
Are there any sustainable attributes that you may now be interested to look into that you didn't look into during this exercise? And then a secondary question on this one is, did you look into social sustainable attributes or only environmental?
We looked at mostly environmental. I guess, we asked about fair trade, so that leans kind of social and environmental. Yes, there are other attributes I would like to look into. I would really like to look further into the locally sourced stuff, because consumers did say that was kind of the most important thing to them. I would really like to now go in and see, well, what does local now really mean to you as the consumer? Is that really 100 miles? Can we go further than 100 miles? So because locally sourced flowers was kind of the big one, I would really like to now understand what locally sourced flowers means to that consumer by, opening and broadening that definition up to get a further understanding of how far can we source these flowers from different places to still claim that they're locally sourced to the consumer. So that's the one I'm kind of really interested in looking at.
There's another question here on kind of implementing the data. How does one show clients their sustainability efforts? So how does a retail florist take this and then implement it to show it to the consumer?
Right. My best answer is through promotion and advertisement. Nobody's going to know what you're doing unless you're telling everybody what you're doing. So if you're, using locally sourced flowers, if you are composting your flower waste, I would make a great effort to put that in my promotional and advertisement stuff. That would be on the top of my website somewhere. That would be on all my social media pages. I would do everything I could to get that out into the public, to make it known that I'm the flower shop around that's doing the sustainable stuff, just because the consumers aren't going to know unless we tell them about it.
Is there anything in the results that surprised you?
Yeah, the thing that I kind of found most surprising was the importance that the consumers put on composting floral waste. all the other kind of sustainable attributes we asked them about dealt with changing the products that the floral provider offered. So, changing to using locally sourced or organic or fair trade, or changing the products to less plastic. So that's something that the consumer can physically kind of take home with them at the end of the day. Whereas composting your flower waste, the consumer doesn't really get anything from that. We're not going to, give them composted flower waste unless we could compost the flower waste and sell it, I guess. But I found that interesting that change was not really anything that the consumer was going to take home with them at the end of the day. That was a real back end, behind the scenes sort of change that a floral provider can make and kind of talk about. And the consumer still said that would matter to them. So, they're not taking anything home at the end of the day. I also kind of thought that the composting one was kind of the easiest one to introduce into a smaller sort of business with the least amount of kind of changes that you have to make to your business model. I thought that was kind of the easiest one that could be done. So that's what surprised me, was the importance on composting your flower waste that the consumers put on there. That kind of surprised me.
There's another question here that might be, again, like a secondary look. Can you elaborate on the differences in perceptions and behavior between an urban population and a rural countryside population?
Yeah, that's again something we didn't specifically look at in this study. We did collect the information on what state they lived in, but we did not specifically say, are you living in an urban population or a rural population? So again, that would be something that we would have to look at a bit deeper in an additional study. That's something we just didn't look at in this study.
I have one other one over here, and then if anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and submit. If I am currently doing something sustainable in your business that's not covered in the project, do you think that you would recommend still advertising based on the results?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything we asked the consumers about, 50% or more of the participants said that would be in something that would kind of push them to purchase from your flower shop over another one. So if you're doing anything sustainable at the moment, even if it's not listed on what we did here, I would use that in my promotion and my advertisement stuff. I would put that up on my websites and on my social media pages and really make it known that you're the floral provider in town attempting to make these changes. Because I mean, how are the consumers to know if we don't tell them?
Thank you. I think we've gotten through most of the questions here. I'll keep looking to see if any others come in. I would like to note, because there were a couple of questions related to it, the full report is on the FMF site, and there's a link in the chat. The webinar will also be posted there. So anyone looking for the recording, it will be there in its entirety. A couple of days after this, we'll process it as quickly as we can. And we also have several articles breaking down the data going up. There's already 2 up now, and then there's a couple of more coming. So if you go there, you can find additional resources for this study. And since I'm not seeing any other additional questions right now, I'm going to go ahead and thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. The full report, as I noted, will be available on our site, which is floralmarketingfund.org. You can email any additional questions that you may have to info@floralmarketingfund.org, and we're happy to follow up with you there. We're also releasing a few additional articles, as I mentioned, another webinar, and there will be a new online course from BloomNet coming soon. If you have any additional questions, like I said, you can reach out. The studies are made possible through industry support and involvement, so please consider a contribution while you're on our site. I want to say thank you again to Cole and the entire research team at both MSU and TSU, as well as our co-sponsors, BloomNet and Syndicate Sales. We look forward to future opportunities for collaboration. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Please take a moment to fill out our follow-up survey once the webinar closes, and let us know if you have any requests for future consumer research and marketing topics from the Floral Marketing Fund. I hope you all have a great afternoon.